Hey everyone, so this week we are getting into the first two parts of the social change leadership model. It is also the first two parts of the individual values set of the model. And like I mentioned in the first mini lecture, this really does start setting the groundwork for how you as an individual then start, you know, in terms of your part of the model, you start moving in towards the group values and then the society values, but it starts with your own individual values. So first, let's start with the consciousness of self. So in terms of defining yourself, right, there's a couple things you have to think about. So one, you have your own personality trait. It's influenced by other people and the environment, and it requires continual development. When I usually do my overview of communication in some of my other courses, I talk about the fact that we all have our own field of experience. It is essentially anything and everything you've ever experienced in your entire life. The school you went to, who raised you, friends that you had when you were younger, when you were older, what TV shows and movies you watched, what music you listened to, what church you went to, all of those things influence your field of experience. So it is why when I ask someone if they prefer Coke or Pepsi, most folks have like a pretty quick answer in terms of what they prefer. And so if it's something as small as like what soda you prefer is influenced by this field of experience. And of course, when you get into some really tough topics, that also is going to be influenced by your field of experience. But that also makes sense why that also helps us make sense in terms of why conflict is so easy to happen when we're interacting with other people, because we have these different field of experiences and they start bumping up against each other when we start trying to make decisions and working with other people. So thinking about the fact that you are continually developing, that means you have to have developmental readiness. Okay, what does that look like, or what are some of the concepts, right? So one is the leader's motivation to develop, so having goals that require improved leadership effectiveness and your own belief in your ability to learn to be a leader, right? There are some folks who argue that leadership is something that's innate, right? Innate, that you're just born to be a leader. But there is this growing belief that you can learn to be a leader, that you can get better at different tasks and abilities and skills and improve those skills to become a better leader. The other part of developmental readiness is the leader's ability to learn. I like wholeheartedly believe that we should all be lifelong learners. That doesn't mean that you have to be at school the entire time, but you should always want to learn. You should, and that doesn't mean just learning about subjects. You should be learning about other people. When you were in a position of leadership, you should be trying to learn about your team and learn about their strengths, their weaknesses, what their ambitions and goals are. All of those things are part of the learning process. But in terms for yourself, part of that learning is self-awareness, right? Being understanding your own motivations and goals and what pushes you, and the ability to examine your own thinking, right? Because there are some folks who have a fixed mindset, which feels like, hey, I am who I am. I can't get any better or worse for the most part. And that's just how things are. That's very much a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset. Instead of saying like, I'm bad at math, you'll say, well, math is something that I have to work a little bit harder for, right? Or it's an area that I have to put a little bit more effort into. Those are the difference between a growth and a fixed mindset. And for developmental readiness, you absolutely have to have a growth mindset. So what are some of the aspects of individual identity? Again, all of this part of consciousness of self. Your values, your principles, and your identity. And just like I mentioned, these are all of the things that kind of influence that: your culture, your faith, your family, your friends, which otherwise known as your generational peers. But that also means some of the folks in popular culture who are popular at the time when you're growing up. Your personal style, talents, skills, your specialized knowledge, and your aspirations and dreams. So all of those things make up part of your individual identity. And like I mentioned before, in terms of the foundations of consciousness of self, of a conscious self, sorry, we have self-awareness, so making sure that you're aware of who you are and what motivates you. Conscious mindfulness, right? Really putting in the effort to think about what it is that you're saying and what you're doing. Feedback to yourself and welcoming feedback from other people, and continual personal reflection. So once you have this idea of who you are and what values are really important to you and what drive you, the next part we have in terms of the individual values is congruence. So when we align, congruence is defined, because I know this is the one word when we start getting into this model that people ask what it means. So it means when we align our interior beliefs and values with our exterior actions and behaviors, right? So essentially we are letting our personal values drive our actions and our behavior patterns. And you can feel when that's aligned. I've talked to folks before. Even when like you were a kid and your parents had instilled these values in you, and you had a friend or someone convince you to do something that was outside of those values, that kind of gut feeling that you had knowing like I'm doing something I probably shouldn't be doing. That's a small example of what it feels like when your values aren't driving your actions, when you're not congruent. And so this is why congruence is just a big part of the social change leadership model, because those values should be driving your actions. So what does congruence mean? We match our inner world, which is our values, our principles, and our priorities, and we match those with the outer world. So through decisions and actions, including how we treat other people, right? That idea that we want to treat other people the way that we want to be treated, or even better, right? Like getting to know those individuals and treating them the way that they would like to be treated. And then one thing to think about in terms of congruence is that it's not a finish line. And if you go back to that first lecture that I put up, the whole model isn't a finish line, right? We continually see that interaction between the different spheres of values. Congruence is very much the same thing, right? So as your awareness of core values grows, the desires to act consistently with those values grows as well. And it's a continuous process of self-evaluation and growth. So there are some questions to ask in terms of what congruence will look like, right? This idea of self-authorship and congruence. So in terms of the cognitive part of it, right? So how do I know that I'm in congruence? Well, you're using your belief as opposed to those others to guide your actions. To guide your actions. Then we have the intrapersonal part of it. So who am I? What would congruence look like in that dimension? You're having a deep understanding of who you are and using this information to inform what you do. And lastly, the interpersonal part, where you're talking to other people. What kinds of relationships do I want to construct with others? You're interacting with others in ways that match your values. And oftentimes that means that you're creating relationships with people who also match your values. Doesn't mean you're going to get along on everything. It doesn't mean that you can't get along with people who don't have similar values, but it tends to happen where you're going to drift towards people who match your values. So in terms of this first part of the model, we have your own consciousness of self, this idea that you know who you are, what values and principles and attributes are important to you. And then we have congruence, where you have the actions that are matching those values.